Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. A couple of years ago, my buddy Jake was doing some online selling to make some extra cash. One of the items he listed was an old commercial-grade water heater, the kind you see in church kitchens and community halls. It was still in working order, so he posted it for $200. Soon after, Jake got an email from a guy named Mike who owned a landscaping company. Mike offered $150 cash for the water heater if Jake could do the deal that same day. Jake agreed and they made the exchange, no issues. About 2 weeks later, Jake received another email from Mike claiming the water heater wasn't functioning properly. Weird, but Jake was upfront about it. He told Mike he could either get a full refund or Jake would cover repair costs up to $100. Instead of taking him up on that offer, Mike sent Jake an invoice demanding $500. Saying he'd already paid to get the water heater fixed. The invoice stated that if Jake didn't cough up the money within 48 hours, Mike would sicken a debt collector on him. Fearing that threat, Jake begrudgingly paid up and forwarded Mike the confirmation. Mike's smug response, "This is sometimes the price you pay when buying used electronics. Have a nice day." A month or so down the line, Jake was at a bar when he overheard a young woman griping about her boss, the owner of a landscaping company, totally ripping off some idiot who sold him a water heater. Intrigued, Jake pulled up a chair at her table. "Mind if I hear this story?" She obliged, recounting how her boss had bought a junked water heater for $30 and a working one for $150. He then billed the guy who sold him the working unit for repairing the broken one before flipping it to some community group for $400. Jake played dumb, asking, "What's this scumbag's company so I don't accidentally hire them?" She named the business. The same one owned by Mike, the guy who had snookered Jake over the water heater deal. Sono vadiot. Jake was irate, but with the pandemic striking soon after, he had bigger issues to deal with. Then about 18 months later, while browsing the same site where he'd sold the water heater, he noticed Mike's company was unloading a bunch of landscaping equipment and materials. Shovels, wheelbarrows, lights for night work, power tools, construction supplies, and a generator. Now, where Jake lived, there were regulations that any generators being sold had to come with a safety inspection certificate proving they were in proper working condition, no exposed wiring, etc. Most sellers ignored this rule, and the generator Mike was hawking clearly looked too sketchy to pass inspection. The kicker was, if a business failed to provide one of these certificates within 2 weeks after a buyer's request, and the authorities got involved, the penalties were harsh. Steep fines and mandatory refunds plus compensation for any related costs incurred by the buyer. That's when the wheels started turning for Jake. He roped his roommate Paul into going halvesies on purchasing Mike's generator, with Paul up front covering the full $800 cost via online transfer. On pickup day, the gruff, ornery Mike was clearing out his storage unit, barking orders at his workers. He refused to provide any inspection paperwork for the generator, bluntly stating, "As is, no returns." Jake and Paul took the generator to an electrician buddy who, after examining it, gave them an invoice quoting the repair costs at a wallet-busting $6,000. His professional opinion? It'd be cheaper to buy a new one. Honestly, this thing never should have been sold. It should have been junked. They also discovered the main ID number had been scratched off, though a secondary tracking number was still visible. Armed with this, the guys contacted Mike demanding the $6,000 repair costs, only to be rebuffed with his as-is, no-returns line. When they pressed him about the inspection certificate, Mike went radio silent for days. After numerous follow-up emails, his only response was to offer taking the generator back for the original $800. They declined, reiterating their demand for the certificate. For 2 weeks, they bombarded Mike with daily emails about the certificate to no avail. Finally, they reported him to the online marketplace and the authorities, submitting screenshots of the original generator listing as evidence. 4 months later, the case landed in court. Before the hearing, Mike approached Jake, making one last desperate plea. If Jake and Paul told the judge they'd accepted an $800 refund, this could all be swept under the rug. "That's what's happening here, end of story," Mike gruffly insisted. "You're doing what you're told." Jake simply said, "No." The judge made swift work of the case after an inspector stated the generator was in dangerously poor condition, never should have been sold, and that Mike had previously been explicitly instructed not to sell it after failing its inspection back in 2021. Traced to that secondary ID number, there was no doubt it was the same hazardous unit. The ruling: Mike's company was ordered to refund the $800 to Paul, pay the $6,000 repair quote, and slapped with a $12,000 fine, which went directly to Paul as the aggrieved buyer. Outside the courtroom, a livid Mike told them he wouldn't pay a penny more, and couldn't fathom how he deserved such harsh treatment. That's when the penny dropped for Jake. "Remember the water heater?" he asked Mike, who stared back befuddled. Jake then laid it all out. "I do, because I'm the one who sold it to you for $150. I know you got a different busted one repaired and invoiced me for it." The smug look drained from Mike's face as Jake went for the kill. It's a real idiot when what goes around comes around, isn't it? Especially with accumulated interest. You've got 48 hours to pay up, or else a debt collector gets looped in. Remember, this is the price you pay sometimes when selling used electronics. Have a great day. Don't let this hold you back. 2 days later, Mike coughed up the full $18,000. As agreed, Jake and Paul split the $12,000 fine down the middle to cover some bills and expenses. As for the generator, they invested in the needed repairs, obtained a proper inspection certificate, and flipped it for a cool $1,500. They celebrated by treating themselves to an epic night out on the town, Monaco style. All's well that ends well when you can stick it to a scammer and come out on top. The next one is an entitled people story. I've been farming this same plot of land ever since I took over the family business from my dad. It's not a huge farm, just 40 acres of vegetable fields, a small barn, and farmhouse. But it's enough to provide a decent living for my family. The best part about being way out here is not having to deal with nosy, annoying neighbors. Well, that used to be the case until Rich moved in down the road last year. I knew right away he'd be trouble. He's one of those snobby rich guys who think they can do whatever they want just because they have money. As soon as he moved in, he started making all sorts of demands about things he wanted me to change on my property. Like telling me I needed to repaint my barn because the faded red color was an eyesore, and wanting me to cut down the big oak tree near my driveway because it blocked his view. I politely told him thanks, but no thanks each time he asked, but it just made him more pissed off. He'd always storm off mumbling insults under his breath. I figured he'd get tired of harassing me eventually. Oh boy, was I wrong. One morning I woke up and looked out my bedroom window to see a bunch of construction equipment rolling up my driveway. I threw on some clothes and rushed outside to see what the heck was going on. And there was Rich standing there with a bunch of workers, telling them where to start digging. I said, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Rich just glanced over at me with a smug look and said, "Oh hey, just having my pool installed. This side of your property gets way better sunlight." My blood started boiling instantly. I yelled, "This is my land, not yours. You can't just build a pool here without permission." Rich completely ignored me and went right on directing the workers where to dig. I was so angry I thought steam might start shooting from my ears like in cartoons, but I took a deep breath and tried to handle this legally. I told the construction crew they were trespassing and needed to leave immediately, or I'd call the police. They seemed unsure what to do. Rich chimed in and said, "Don't worry about him. I've got this covered." Then he pulled out some paperwork and handed it to me with the nastiest grin. It was a forged contract stating I agreed to let Rich build his pool on my property in exchange for $20,000. My signature was clearly forged. I tore up the contract right in front of Rich and told the workers this was fraudulent. They looked really nervous and decided to pack up and leave. Rich screamed at them not to go, but finally stormed off when they ignored him. I felt like I had won a small victory in getting rid of the construction crew, but Rich wasn't done being a pain just yet. Over the next few days, I kept catching Rich sneaking onto my property. A few times I saw him measuring out the pool dimensions, but whenever I confronted him, he'd scurry away like a dog with his tail between his legs. Then one night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the rumbling sound of machines outside. I looked out in horror to see Rich and a new construction crew digging away at my land with bulldozers and backhoes under the moonlight. I ran outside in my pajamas, beyond furious at this point. I yelled for them to stop, but the machines were so loud I don't even think they heard me. So I jumped in my truck and drove it right in front of the bulldozer, forcing the driver to stop. Rich came running over, screaming at me to move my truck. I refused, and we got into a heated shouting match. The construction guys got uncomfortable and eventually left. Over the next couple weeks, Rich kept trying the middle of the night sneak attacks to build his pool, but I managed to catch him every time and put a stop to it. It was like an insane game of whack-a-mole. But I was at my limit. Rich had succeeded in digging up large chunks of my land in the process, damaging my property. So I decided to take legal action. I met with a lawyer and told him the whole story. He helped me file a lawsuit against Rich for trespassing, vandalism, and attempted fraud. A few weeks later, we had our day in court. Rich acted like he had done nothing wrong, saying it was just a misunderstanding about property lines. He even tried to use that forged contract again as evidence before my lawyer objected. But I had photographs documenting all the damage Rich had done to my land, and I had police reports from the multiple times I had called them out to my property to stop Rich. The judge ended up ruling completely in my favor, saying Rich was clearly in the wrong. She ordered Rich to pay me $15,000 to repair the damage he did to my property, and she slapped him with a restraining order saying he couldn't step foot on my land again. Rich looked shell-shocked, like he couldn't believe money and arrogance hadn't gotten him out of trouble. As we were leaving court, he gave me a death glare and threatened, "You haven't seen the last of me. I always get my way." I had to laugh. What was he going to do now with a restraining order in place? Sure enough, he did keep finding petty ways to annoy me from his own property line, like blasting loud music at all hours and shining floodlights into my windows at night. But I didn't budge, and I made sure to call the cops and document everything in case I needed more evidence against Rich down the road. Eventually, he seemed to give up his crusade of harassment once he realized he was only making himself look worse. The pool debacle turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Rich had exposed himself as the unstable jerk he was. Now everyone in town knows to watch out for him, and I realized just how far I was willing to go to defend this land that I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into for so many years. This farm means everything to me, and no amount of money can take that away. The next one is a petty revenge story. Well, not sure if this will be removed because I actually didn't take any action on their apparent bad luck today, or because this just sounds like me being an but couldn't think of anywhere else to post. I was made fun of because my teeth not being straight, because of my big nose, because someone saw my drunk dad around on weekends and that was joke, because teachers liked me, because I lived really far from school, because I didn't have money to buy much during lunch, or because if my shoes or backpack were still fine I would use them the next school year as well because we were broke. You name it, I had it. Even some people I thought I was being friends with would eventually join whoever was the coolest kid around and making me feel like crap. And I know we were kids. This doesn't mean these people are bad persons still today. I don't know them, but I was a kid too, and I wasn't a ducking bully. I was always the youngest of my class, because my country allows people to skip grades, so I graduated HS at 14. I am 26 now. I live in a small city and work for a manufacturing company who is the biggest employer of the region. So naturally, people I know end up working there since there's a lot of people. I was recently promoted and now make like 7 times the average salary of my country, own a decent car that's paid in full, about to graduate from my master's, am saving to buy a house, have good friends, go on weekend getaways a couple times a year, and am a happy person. The other day at work, a new operator, she was in training, so new employee, stopped me to say hi and was one of the people who hurt me. The one thing I remember she used to say was, "Poor Esther, let's all raise funds so we can get her teeth fixed." I remember her thing was saying "poor Esther" in a condescending way and laugh, not my real name, XD'd. She also a couple times stole my backpack and hid it in a bathroom trash can. There's something so insulting on people saying "poor you" because of something you don't even consider a relevant problem in the moment, and it's a problem only because they made it like that about my teeth. She's pregnant, her 3rd pregnancy. Started college for a humanities degree that she didn't complete. Is single mom of 2 other kids and has jumped from manufacturing company to manufacturing company after she left college. This is minimum wage in my country, that's like $400 USD monthly. I have met other people from HS over the years and same case. One of them even went to jail for hitting his wife and kid. I am having a great life, and it's not based on other people having a bad one, and this perhaps makes me a bad person and I know I can fall too or make bad decisions. And IDK, maybe in her mind, this girl is super happy with her life and bunch of kids and salary. IDK. But I know if my decisions ever make me pull the short stick, I won't have people pleased with my bad luck as I am with theirs. because I am not a ducking bully, and I don't damage people intentionally for fun as these a-holes did. Guess the conclusion here is, bad years don't last forever. HS is just a phase, and being the queen bee in HS doesn't mean a successful life. Driving to HS in a cute car or having much money for lunch or being successful in HS doesn't mean that's for life. Just as being the rug everyone steps on doesn't mean you're going to be it forever. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This is not my story, but my friend Adam's. Adam is a retired police officer, and this takes place in the mid-90s, back when Adam was a beat cop, maybe a year or two into his service. At the time this story takes place, a firebug had targeted several businesses over the course of a 3-month period. The fires were put out, but they were getting bigger and bigger, causing thousands of dollars in damage. Everyone was on edge, and the police were patrolling the area every night to try and catch Mr. Firebug. On this particular night, in the middle of February, Adam and his partner Rick drew the short stick and thus were assigned to patrol part of the area. While on patrol, he notices a classic Mercedes-Benz pulling up to a house, and a familiar lady dressed in a thick fur coat steps out. He groans it's the wife of a local business owner that every officer in this town have had the displeasure to ticket for various parking traffic violations. It would have been fine if she were a nice lady or something. But no. Her 3 default sentences were, "Don't you know who I am?" "Where's your manager supervisor?" and "I'll have your job." Seriously, she was a Karen before Karens were even a thing. Rick points out to Adam that Karen had parked right by a fire hydrant. Par for the course. Adam gets ready and steps out of the squad car. "Good evening, Mrs. Entitled, ma'am," Adam said. "What are you doing here?" Karen bellowed. Adam guessed that's the Karen version of the word hello. "Working the beat. You do know you parked next to a fire hydrant?" "So?" Karen said. "I'm suggesting you move it before I write you a ticket. I'm not in the mood for extra paperwork tonight." "Listen, you need to leave my car alone, or I'll have your job." With that, Karen storms off to the house, goes inside, and slams the door. Adam thought, if you say so, and proceeded to check the outside of the car for any more violations, and wishing that being an idiot was a federal offense. As he's putting the ticket under the windshield wiper, the call everyone's been dreading comes on the radio. A fire alarm has been triggered. The address? Right across the street. Adam looks over at the building and can see a faint orange glow in the windows on the second floor. He reports the glow. He and Rick get ready in case Mr. Firebug decides to cross their path. Several officers arrive and set a perimeter around the building as the glow gets brighter and brighter. Unfortunately, by the time the fire department gets there, flashover happens and all the windows on the second floor get blown out. It was so hot that Adam felt sweat form on his face. The fire department need to get the hoses set up. But Karen's car is in the way. Using safety hammers, they break the windows and run the hoses through, getting everything set up in record time. During all of the chaos, Karen comes out and she sounds like a banshee that had swallowed an air raid siren. She runs over and tries unhooking the hose from the hydrant. "What are you doing? My car is ruined!" It took 2 officers to restrain her and bark at her to go inside and let everyone do their jobs. She actually listened and returned inside. Adam spent the rest of his shift helping with the fire and investigation. It was close to dawn when he returned to the station to finish up. All he wanted was to go home and crawl into bed. That's when his supervisor calls Rick and him over and reports that Karen reported several $1,000s worth of damage. Not only had her windows broken, but water had gotten in and froze because it was, again, the middle of February. The supervisor asked them what happened, and they reported everything. Fortunately, the dash cam caught a recording of the event. The supervisor shook her head, laughed, and said, "Well, you had nothing to do with the car getting damaged, so I consider this closed." A few weeks later, they caught the Firebug, a different business owner who was trying to commit insurance fraud. He figured that if several other buildings caught fire, nobody would think he was responsible for burning down his own business. Unfortunately, Karen never did seem to learn her lesson, so she was back to racking up tickets and being a thorn in the police's side. She did have to pay for the damages and the ticket Adam gave her. The next one is an entitled people story. About 15 years ago, I was a frames engineer for BT, UK national telecoms provider, which meant I maintained the telephone exchange framework. This summer Friday evening, I was on my way to a local exchange to work, which happened to be at the end of a long, rarely used road as it was a dead end. Halfway up the road, I had to stop as a local pub had thought it would be a good idea to block the road with massive wine casks and use as tables for a bit of al fresco drinking. I drove up and was greeted by hostile looks and shouts of how it was a dead end and you'll only have turnaround, etc., which I countered with, "I'm going to work, please get out of the way." No one moved, even made a show of moving, so I just put it in gear and drove through, knocking over several barrels, drinks, followed by howls of protests. I get to the end of the road, and as I get out, some of them are running up the road to have a go, but most are thinking, "We'll have him as he has to come back." I unlock the car park, drive in and relocate it behind me, and get down to work. About 10 o'clock, the fire alarms start going off and smoke start to seep downstairs. I grab my phone and get out, calling the emergency services as I go. The operator tells me that they're already on the way as the building is listed as critical infrastructure and has a direct alarm. Sure enough, by the time I've got the big gates open for access, I can see the fire engines tanking up the road towards me, except they have to slam their brakes on as the pub drinkers are just standing in the road around the barrels drinking. I watch on as the firefighters jump out and can see them start to hurl the barrels out of the way, trying to clear a path, while simultaneously the drinkers are trying to put them out again. When they arrive, they're all business and crack on sorting out the fire, which turned out to be an electrical fault, so got sorted pretty quickly. However, on the clear-up afterwards, the chief fire officer was apoplectic, saying he's never seen anything like it. I turned to him and said, "I bet they told you it was a dead end, there's no point going up there," and I told him of my run-in with them. His reply was, "They'll be looking for a new place to drink soon as his license has got duck all chance of being renewed, if I have any say in the matter." I was told to go home after that as the smoke was still bad, and as I drove by the pub, all the lights were off and there was no one in sight. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.